Cop stops car. Little girl in the back gave him the shock of his life. When the police chief stopped the speeding car, he didn't know it would turn out like this. In addition to the couple in the front seats, there was another passenger. In the back seat sat a little girl who jumped out of the car crying and fell straight into the policeman's arms. Why did she behave the way she did? Was she in any danger? The morning started early as always. Police Chief Ryan Zimmerman was ready for another day of police work, hoping nothing would go wrong. He took his equipment and car and started patrolling the streets. Little did he know how bad this day was going to be. But in his job, he was always prepared for anything. At least that's what he believed. Police Chief Ryan Zimmerman was highly respected by his colleagues. He had many years of experience in the police service and was always the one to cheer everyone up when they needed a pep up. Everyone vouched for him and thought he was a good policeman, but would he be able to keep his composure that day? Would he abide by the rules when it came to a child? Police Chief Ryan Zimmerman wasn't just a respected police officer. Everyone in the neighborhood loved him and knew they could count on him. Whenever someone needed help, he was the first to volunteer. He also contributed to youth education programs and outreach. But as great as his professional and life experience was, there were still things that surprised him. This week had been particularly difficult. He was involved in a delicate situation at a suspect's home and things didn't go as planned. People were injured, and despite his many years of experience, the officer was still affected by the incident. Everyone knew this and tried to cheer him up, but he was still tense when he left for his shift in the morning. His colleagues hoped that things would go smoothly for a while so the chief would recover. They couldn't go more wrong. Thanks to the support of his family and colleagues, the police chief managed to get back on his feet and return to work. Everyone knew how difficult the job of a police officer can be. The chief was fortunate enough to have such people in his life, but would he be able to keep a cool head when disaster struck? Or would he collapse and have no hope of recovery? In the late afternoon, Police Chief Zimmerman assisted an officer in the arrest of a motorist. The man was driving at excess speed and was distracted. The car was stopped. The machine had also determined the vehicle's registration was invalid. Immediately, the officers noticed the driver and a woman in the front seats of the vehicle, but there was someone else in the back seat who would completely change the whole situation. For all his experience with suspicious vehicles over the years, Chief Zimmerman had assumed it would be a routine arrest. But when he checked the driver's paperwork, his gaze wandered to the back seat. He'd been with the police for a long time, but that day he saw something he knew he had to act on. When officers from the Morrow, Georgia Police Department stopped the speeder that day, they had no idea their encounter with the occupants in the vehicle would end like this. The whole thing didn't start well. The driver was stopped for speeding and inattentive driving. Then he began to argue with the officer who'd stopped him. He was angry with the policeman. Chief Zimmerman had an uneasy feeling. The woman in the car was Ebony Rhodes. She clutched her purse tightly as she felt her hands get wet and sweat run down her face. She looked in the rearview mirror and watched as her husband became more and more belligerent towards the police. She didn't want to panic, but she knew she was in trouble. She didn't think she could talk her way out of it. Onlooker Sam Juarez said there was also a woman and a little girl in the car. They witnessed the whole thing when the man, who claimed he was the woman's husband, made a scene and the police prepared to arrest him. Sam went out of his way to make sure the police wouldn't do anything rash, but something else was to happen. Ebony Rhodes knew the police officer wouldn't look favorably on her offense. Her husband was driving her car, but it wasn't registered. Her driver's license had been revoked, she had no insurance, and her boyfriend had been arrested. But that wasn't what worried her the most. There was a danger their terrible secret would be revealed. She couldn't help but cry at the thought. Ebony's face was filled with tears when Zimmerman reached her window. The officer was stunned when he saw her. Before Ebony could explain herself, Zimmerman was startled by a strange noise that brought him to a stop. A strange noise from the back of the car. When he glanced to the back seat, he was shocked. The last few months had been pretty tough for Ebony. After losing her mother, she packed up her life and moved with her daughter to a new city where she met her husband. But Ebony was soon confronted with a relentless reality. She tried to keep it a secret for her daughter's sake, but she couldn't keep it a secret forever. In the back seat of the unregistered car that the officers stopped was a frightened little girl hugging her teddy bear. She was scared and didn't know what was going on. The officer wanted to see if she was in danger. Did she have anything to do with the other passengers? The police chief thought about what to do next and how to calm the situation, as the man was still screaming and resisting arrest and the woman looked frightened. But then he noticed something else that shocked him even more. The crying of the child and the mother broke Zimmerman's heart, but then he noticed the little girl didn't have a safety seat. He asked Ebony, who owned the car, and checked her papers. He then told Ebony that he had no choice but to arrest her husband and confiscate her car as it wasn't registered. Ebony's heart sank. She knew that when the car was searched, she had to fear the worst. While his colleagues arrested the angry man, Zimmerman was focused on something else. He realized that someone had to do something about the little girl in the back seat. Apparently, the woman was the little girl's mother. While talking to the officer, Zimmerman noticed the child was crying. The police chief knelt next to the car and comforted her, asking her questions and explaining to her what had happened, not knowing he was being recorded. The little girl jumped out of the car and was ready to confront the policeman. Still holding her teddy bear, she walked up to Police Chief Zimmerman. By late afternoon, the police chief was exactly where he needed to be. The little girl walked confidently up to him during a traffic stop, fighting back tears as she asked him if her mother's husband, who'd just been arrested, would ever come home. He was speechless. The little girl's gesture ripped Zimmerman's heart out. He promised her that he was safe and would be home soon. She nodded, then wrapped her little arms around the man, resting her head on his shoulder and sobbing. It was a beautiful moment that made the policeman feel that his job mattered and the smallest thing could make a big difference in someone's life. But something was wrong with the whole situation. The officer was very sad but was able to regain his composure and comfort the little girl. The police chief encouraged the little girl and told her she was safe with him. It was a terrible, beautiful moment, and the man had no idea he was being filmed until the footage was sent to him a few hours later. Officer Zimmerman took Ebony and the little girl to the police station, where Ebony was able to call a staff member to pick them up and tell her sister her car had been impounded and her husband was in jail. However, she had other more pressing problems. As soon as the police searched her car, she had to clean up. The police chief had no idea his small gesture would have such a big impact. After it was posted on social media, it spread like a virus. Everyone congratulated him and said the police needed more people like him. The country would be a safer and friendlier place for everyone, but there was something wrong. Police Chief Zimmerman was in his office when an officer knocked on his door. He beckoned him in and the officer explained to him there was a problem. They had conducted a routine search of Ebony's impounded car, but they found more than they bargained for. Zimmerman went to the seizure office to see for himself. "We have to do something," he said, realizing what was really going on. Inside Ebony's car, officers found numerous bags, backpacks, and other items. At first glance, it looked like a hoarder's car, but then the truth dawned on him. Ebony and her daughter slept in that car. It was their home. Alarmed police officer Zimmerman called Ebony to talk to her, and that's when she told him the whole story. Since moving to the new city, Ebony had been working shifts at a Walmart store. Her salary wasn't very high, and on top of that, she had chronic health issues. When she decided to leave her husband, she and her child became homeless. She'd been living in this car for the past 2 months, and the details of why she had to leave broke Police Chief Zimmerman's heart. No wonder she couldn't afford safety seats for her young daughter Sadie. It wasn't easy to find a safe place to park her car at night, and sometimes she had to drive from place to place. "A lot of times I didn't sleep because Sadie was sleeping," Ebony recalls. "I made sure nothing happened and no one tried to rob us, so we just stayed in the car." She was ashamed of her situation, so she tried to keep it a secret and succeeded for a while. Ebony's husband had a serious drinking problem and became aggressive one night. At that moment, she knew she had to leave him. She summoned up all her courage, packed everything she had into the car, and drove away while he slept. But after 2 months of living on the street and parking in a different place every night, he still managed to find her. He didn't take no for an answer. When Police Chief Zimmerman arrested him, he was in the process of taking Ebony and her daughter to his home. When Ebony's husband was pulled over and arrested while driving her car, it was a godsend. Ebony had been silently praying for some kind of divine intervention, and that's exactly what happened. Her daughter was also afraid of him, so she asked Zimmerman if he'd come home. Her tears were not tears of sadness, they were tears of joy. It broke Zimmerman's heart when he heard Ebony's story. He knew he had to help her. He called the manager of a homeless shelter for families he'd recently met. "I called her and said, 'Listen, I have a mother and daughter who need a place to sleep,'" he recalls. And she said, "Yeah, I got some space. And if you're familiar with emergency shelters in the middle of winter, nothing is free, and she had something free. I couldn't believe it." And Ebony couldn't either. "The police department is my backbone," Ebony says. "Zimmerman has helped me go a long way. The whole police force is my family because I can turn to them for my questions." She feels nothing but gratitude for the disastrous traffic control, which has proven to be a blessing. "If he hadn't been stopped that day, I'd probably still be with him, taking a risk every day. The fact that he was stopped that day changed my life."